The tunnel boring machine stopped at 3:17 in the morning, 70 feet below Wilshire Boulevard, in a space where the Earth's temperature holds steady at 68 degrees regardless of the season above. A crew of 11 workers stood in a tube barely wide enough for 2 men to pass shoulder to shoulder. The concrete lining showed hairline fractures that hadn't been there during the previous shift. Methane detectors pulsed their green all-clear signals, but the foreman knew what the instruments couldn't measure. They were drilling through an old oil field where 50 million barrels had been extracted between 1900 and 1960, leaving voids no one had properly mapped. The Santa Monica Fault ran 300 feet to the north. The Newport Inglewood Fault sat 2 miles south. The ground here had liquefied in 1862 and again in 1933. This is a story about what happens when you try to build permanence in a place designed by geology to move. Do you build a subway system because the city needs it, or because admitting you can't is unthinkable? The Pacific Electric Railway completed the Belmont Tunnel under Bunker Hill on November 21, 1925, boring 520 feet through a hill that would later be demolished entirely and replaced with office towers. The tunnel cost $900,000. On opening day, a Los Angeles Times writer named Joseph Park stood at the entrance and called it the initial unit of a mightier project yet to come, a comprehensive subway system mapped out by the consulting firm Kelker, DeLau and Company, that would span 153 miles and cost $133 million. The plan showed tunnels branching from a central station under Pershing Square, north to Hollywood, west to Santa Monica, south to Venice Beach, east toward the citrus groves. It was rejected by voters that same year. Rural communities in the county, already dependent on automobiles, saw no reason to tax themselves for a subway that would serve the dense urban core they'd deliberately chosen not to live in. The Pacific Electric Railway and Los Angeles Railway were private companies. Business interests opposed elevated rail segments that would cast shadows on storefronts. The automobile industry was booming. Henry Huntington, who'd built the red car streetcar empire to sell real estate, had already made his fortune spreading the city outward. The tunnel remained. The broader vision dissolved. For the next 55 years, Los Angeles grew horizontally. What the city refused to fund in 1925, it would eventually spend 60 times more to build starting in 1986. By then, the ground beneath Wilshire Boulevard had been drilled for oil, drained of water, capped with concrete, and left riddled with abandoned wells that leaked methane. By then, the Santa Monica Freeway had proven that even 10 lanes couldn't move enough cars. By then, the idea of trains seemed almost nostalgic, a return to something that had been discarded, not an innovation. The Belmont Tunnel still exists. It's used for storage now. Tour groups occasionally walk through it. The concrete walls curve in the same gentle arc the engineers designed to allow 2 streetcars to pass each other at 30 miles per hour. It was the first subway tunnel in Los Angeles. It was also the last for 68 years. Between 1925 and 1993, the city dismantled the largest electric railway system in the world. The last Pacific Electric red car made its final run from downtown Los Angeles to Long Beach on April 9th. Ridership had been falling for decades. Fares couldn't cover operating costs. The buses were slower but cheaper to run. General Motors, Firestone, and Standard Oil bought the systems and converted them. Historians still argue about whether this was conspiracy or simple economics. What's documented is this: by 1963, every streetcar line was gone. The rights-of-way were sold, paved over, built on. The city had chosen the car. Proposition A passed in November 1980 with 54% of the vote. It established a half-cent sales tax to fund a regional transit system. The measure named 7 corridors for rail lines. Kenneth Hahn, a Los Angeles County supervisor, authored it. He'd watched the last red car stop running. He promised voters, "I'm going to put the trains back." What he didn't mention, what perhaps no one fully understood yet, was that putting trains back would require boring through earthquake faults, abandoned oil fields, and 30 years of political warfare between agencies, neighborhoods, and levels of government that couldn't agree on where to dig or how deep or whether digging was worth the risk at all. The first shovel broke ground on September 29, 1986, at the future site of Civic Center Station. By then, the estimated cost for the full system had grown from $9 billion to what analysts quietly predicted might reach $20 billion. By then, the federal government under Reagan had cut transit funding. By then, two transit agencies, the Southern California Rapid Transit District and the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission, were fighting over whether to build heavy rail subway or light rail on the surface. They would eventually build both. They would also merge into a single agency after the rivalry became so dysfunctional that the state legislature forced the consolidation. But that was still 7 years away. In 1986, optimism was the official position. The renderings showed gleaming stations with public art. The timeline promised completion by 1998. The budget was fixed. The route was set. 4 months later, everything changed. At 4:47 in the afternoon on March 24, 1982-5, a worker at the Ross Dress for Less store on the corner of 3rd Street and Fairfax Avenue punched his time card in the employee lounge. The spark from the time clock ignited methane gas that had been seeping into the basement storage room overnight. The explosion blew out windows, tore portions of the roof off the building, and injured 23 people. Flames erupted through cracks in the pavement outside. Fire crews evacuated 4 city blocks. The concrete itself was burning. Television cameras captured footage that would run for days. Fire shooting up from the sidewalk. Manhole covers displaced by pressure from below. Emergency workers in a neighborhood where the ground had betrayed the implicit contract that it would stay inert. Within a week, drilling crews brought in testing equipment. They found a pressurized methane pocket 42 feet below the parking lot. Smaller pockets appeared throughout the surrounding area. They installed pressure gauges, control valves, and a flared pipe to vent the gas safely. The city of Los Angeles designated approximately 400 blocks over the old Salt Lake oil field as a high-potential methane zone, a classification that hadn't existed before that March afternoon. Isotopic analysis confirmed what geologists had suspected. The methane came from the oil field, not from recent biological decomposition. The Salt Lake field had been discovered in 1902 when a dairy farmer named Arthur Fremont Gilmore tried to dig a water well and struck oil instead. Over 400 wells had been drilled by 1930. Production peaked. The field was largely abandoned by 1960, though modest extraction resumed in 1962 using slant drilling from urban drill sites. The wells were capped. The neighborhoods were built. The oil and gas stayed below, mostly, except when it didn't. The original 1983 subway plan showed the Metrorail tunneling west along Wilshire Boulevard through the Fairfax district, then turning north toward West Hollywood. It made sense as a transit corridor. Dense population, major job centers, straight path. Congressman Henry Waxman represented the district. He'd opposed the subway even before the explosion, responding to constituents who didn't want construction disrupting their neighborhood. The Ross explosion gave him material for a biblical argument. He introduced federal legislation designating the area as a methane zone and prohibiting the use of federal funds for subway construction through it. The ban passed. The subway route was redrawn. Instead of west on Wilshire, the line would head north on Vermont Avenue, then west on Hollywood Boulevard, then north again through Cahuenga Pass into the San Fernando Valley. Vermont had hospitals, media studios, and dense apartment buildings along its length. They protested having an above-ground light rail line through their neighborhoods. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority changed the Vermont segment from surface rail to subway, adding hundreds of millions to the cost. The official task force report on the Ross explosion was completed in less than 3 months. It concluded that the methane came from natural decomposition of organic matter near the surface, not from the Salt Lake oil field. This finding has been criticized by geologists as scientifically inaccurate, potentially influenced by pressure to avoid holding oil companies liable, and contradicted by the isotopic analysis data. The report absolved the petroleum industry. It recommended building codes, monitoring equipment, and methane detectors in structures within the designated zone. It did not recommend halting urban development. Park La Brea, a large apartment complex near the explosion site, continues to experience tar seepage and methane buildups in basements. In 1989, a bank on 3rd Street had to close for several months when a methane buildup occurred, likely because a relief well installed after the Ross explosion had been improperly managed. In 2015, a small methane explosion occurred near the corner of Wilshire and Curson, directly across from the La Brea tar pits. The tar pits themselves are surface expressions of the same geological system. Crude oil seeping up along the 6th Street Fault, accumulating for thousands of years, trapping Ice Age mammals whose bones remain preserved in the asphalt. The geology doesn't care about transit planning. The Newport-Inglewood fault zone runs through the oil field. The fault acts as a conduit for pressurized fluids. When water was re-injected into the field starting in 1980 for enhanced oil recovery, injection pressures reached 770 pounds per square inch. Studies suggest this hydraulic pressure episodically fractures the fault, temporarily opening it as a valve structure that allows methane to escape to the surface. When pressure drops, the fault closes. The venting stops, until it doesn't. A school near the Ross store had fans installed under the building years before the explosion to prevent methane accumulation. After Ross, schools across the county were tested. New construction in the methane zone requires gas detection and mitigation systems. The infrastructure exists to manage the hazard mostly. But infrastructure requires maintenance, inspection, accurate record-keeping of where old wells were drilled, and constant monitoring. It requires someone to check the instruments and respond when readings change. It requires institutional memory that survives staff turnover and budget cuts. By the end of 1985, the subway's route had been fundamentally altered. The Wilshire Corridor, the densest, most logical path west, was legally prohibited for underground construction. The alternate route added complexity, cost, and time. Congressman Waxman had achieved what neighborhood opposition alone might not have, a federal barrier that couldn't be easily overturned. The ground had spoken. The city listened, but only partially. The subway would still be built. It just wouldn't go where it should. The Northridge earthquake struck at 4:30 in the morning on January 17, 1994. Magnitude 6.7. Duration 10 to 20 seconds. Peak ground acceleration reached 1.82 times the force of gravity, the highest ever recorded in an urban area in North America at that time. The previously undiscovered thrust fault that ruptured lay 18.4 kilometers deep. 60 people died. Damage estimates reached $50 billion. Sections of Interstate 10 collapsed over La Cienega Boulevard. The interchange of Interstate 5 with State Route 14 buckled. The Newhall Pass interchange failed structurally. Parking structures at California State University Northridge pancaked. A hospital in Santa Monica showed the classic X-patterned cracks of shear failure. 11 hospitals suffered damage severe enough that they had to transfer their patients. Steel moment frame buildings, the type engineers had considered among the most earthquake-resistant, fractured at welded connections in ways that invalidated the building code. The Metro Red Line subway, 1-year-old, sustained zero damage. The Blue Line light rail resumed service within 6 hours. The Red Line restarted the next day. There were workers in the tunnels that morning, building the extension toward North Hollywood. The reinforced oval tunnels held. The earth around them absorbed the shock. No trains were running when the shaking began, too early in the morning. But the infrastructure proved that underground was safer than above. This was a public relations victory the transit agency desperately needed. By 1994, the subway project had already acquired a reputation for mismanagement, cost overruns, and controversy. The fact that it survived a major earthquake when freeways collapsed became a talking point. Editorials appeared suggesting the quake might shift commuting patterns toward transit. Ridership on Metrolink's Santa Clarita line boomed temporarily. The Los Angeles Times editorial board wondered if the disaster would wean us from building expensive, community-busting freeways. It didn't. As soon as the freeways reopened, Interstate 10 ahead of schedule by 2.5 months, with contractors working around the clock and receiving bonus payments for early completion, ridership on emergency bus lines dropped. Only the Santa Clarita commuter rail retained increased passengers, and even those numbers fell well below their peak. Angelenos returned to driving. The earthquake had proven transit was safe, but safety wasn't the primary obstacle to ridership. The seismic design of the subway was never accidental. Engineers knew from the beginning they were building in one of the most seismically active regions in the world. The San Andreas Fault runs through California. The Los Angeles Basin sits in a complex zone where the Pacific Plate grinds northwest past the North American Plate, creating a web of thrust faults, strike-slip faults, and blind thrusts that don't reach the surface but can still rupture catastrophically. Metro's design criteria required facilities to ensure life safety and repairability after earthquakes predicted to occur every 2,500 years. The same facilities had to ensure continuous operation after smaller earthquakes with a probability of recurring every 150 years. There's no specific magnitude that tunnels are designed to withstand universally. The question engineers ask is how strong the ground shaking will likely be at the specific tunnel location, based on proximity to faults and soil characteristics. Underground structures benefit from being restrained by the surrounding ground. A building on the surface experiences ground motion amplified by its height and resonance. A tunnel moves with the ground. The challenge is different, racking deformation, where rectangular tunnel cross-sections try to shear into parallelograms, and ovaling deformation, where circular tunnels compress into ovals. Engineers design linings to accommodate these movements without cracking catastrophically. The BART system in San Francisco, designed in the 1960s and opened in 1972, was formative for tunnel seismic design. Joe Wang's 1993 monograph on seismic tunnel design, published the same year the LA Metro opened, became the reference text. It provided simplified methods for evaluating how earthquakes affect underground structures. The design philosophy evolved: allow some inelastic behavior during major quakes, but ensure structures can be repaired within specified time frames. For the LA Metro, numerical modeling estimated ground deformations from shaking, liquefaction, surface faulting, and slope failure. Liquefaction was a particular concern. Saturated soils can behave like liquid when shaken, losing bearing capacity. Mitigation techniques included ground improvement, grouting, stone columns, densification. For surface faulting, special structural detailing of tunnel linings allowed movement at joints without complete failure. The geology complicated everything. The tunnels pass through varying soil and rock conditions. Parts of the alignment go through former wetlands, drained but still susceptible to liquefaction. Parts go through decomposed granite. The segment under the Santa Monica Mountains required tunneling through competent rock, but also through fault zones with crushed and altered material. Each condition requires different design approaches. Scale paragraph. The Northridge earthquake generated 3,000 aftershocks greater than magnitude 1.5 in the first 3 weeks. It caused 114,000 residential units to be declared uninhabitable. It triggered thousands of landslides throughout the mountains surrounding the San Fernando Valley, extending as far north as Castaic Lake, 30 miles from the epicenter. Ground motion instruments recorded horizontal accelerations of 1.25 g and vertical accelerations of 1.2 g. The duration of strong shaking lasted between 10 and 20 seconds. Insurance companies paid out claims exceeding $15 billion, then either stopped offering earthquake insurance in California or severely restricted it. The California legislature created the California Earthquake Authority in response. Over 6,000 square miles of the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area have since been mapped under the Seismic Hazards Mapping Act, covering more than 150 incorporated cities with an aggregate population exceeding 12 million people and annual construction volume over $10 billion. What the Northridge earthquake proved was that the engineering worked. It didn't prove that people would use the subway. By 1994, the Red Line carried minimal passengers, essentially a lunchtime shuttle for downtown workers. The 5-station segment from Union Station to Westlake MacArthur Park had opened in January 1993. Ridership was slow. The line ended in MacArthur Park, a neighborhood associated with crime and drugs, not a destination most downtown workers needed. The subway was safe from earthquakes. It wasn't yet useful for daily life. Those were separate problems. The freeways that collapsed were rebuilt within months. The subway extensions would take 6 more years to reach North Hollywood, and another 7 years after that before the federal methane ban was lifted and Wilshire Corridor construction could restart. Speed of reconstruction depended on political will and available funding. Freeways had both. On June 22, 1995, at approximately 3 in the afternoon, a section of Hollywood Boulevard collapsed into the tunnel being excavated 60 feet below. The sinkhole opened suddenly, swallowing half a city block. Workers underground had minutes to evacuate as water from a ruptured main flooded the tunnel. Buildings along the street sustained structural damage. Stars on the Walk of Fame cracked and fell into the void. No one died, but the images, a gaping hole in one of Los Angeles' most famous streets, muddy water pouring into darkness, became the visual symbol of the subway project's failures. Construction stopped, investigations began. The contractor, Shea Kiewit Kenny, was removed and replaced with Tudor Saliba. But Tudor Saliba and Metro would soon be locked in disputes over tens of millions of dollars in cost overruns. Allegations emerged. Tunnel walls with thickness less than specified or required by law, inadequate grouting, failures in ground stabilization. The precise cause of the Hollywood sinkhole was attributed to the ruptured water main weakening earth above the tunnel, but the incident revealed broader issues with construction management and oversight. The subway had already been 4.5 months behind schedule before the sinkhole. The damage added at least 2 more months. Local businesses along Hollywood Boulevard, blocked from customer access for weeks during construction, began to close. Some had been hanging on, hoping the disruption would be temporary. The sinkhole made clear that temporary could mean years. County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky, who represented parts of the West Side, seized the moment. He'd been skeptical of subway expansion for years, favoring light rail and busways as more cost-effective. The Hollywood sinkhole gave him ammunition. In 1998, he sponsored Los Angeles County Proposition A, the MTA Reform and Accountability Act, which banned the use of county sales tax revenue from Propositions A and C for subway tunneling. The measure passed with 68.1% voter support. Critics called it extreme. They argued it would prevent subways from reaching minority neighborhoods on the East Side, that it represented Yaroslavsky's protection of West Side interests at the expense of regional equity. Yaroslavsky argued that mass transit could be achieved less expensively through light rail and dedicated busways. He pointed to cost overruns, construction problems, and the fact that the system wasn't delivering the ridership projections had promised. The ban meant that local funding, the consistent, predictable revenue stream from county sales taxes, could not be used for the most expensive part of subway construction, actual tunneling. Money could pay for stations, systems, rolling stock planning, but not for boring through the ground. Federal funding became essential. But federal funding came with federal politics. Congressman Henry Waxman still maintained the federal ban on tunneling through the Wilshire methane zone. Even if local money had been available, the most logical corridor west remained legally prohibited. The subway could extend north into the valley, that was already under construction, but it couldn't go west to serve the densest employment centers in Beverly Hills, Century City, and Westwood. The 1-2 punch of Waxman's federal ban and Yaroslavsky's local ban effectively stopped subway expansion for a decade. Construction on the North Hollywood extension continued because it was already more than 80% complete when Proposition A passed. Workers dug under the Santa Monica Mountains using tunnel boring machines, progressing an average of 50 to 200 feet daily with crews operating around the clock 6 days a week. This segment, MOS 3, opened on June 24, 2000. The total cost for all 4 phases of the Red Line came to $4.5 billion. The system that opened in 2000 was shorter than originally planned, cost more than originally estimated, and served fewer passengers than projections had predicted. Weekday ridership on the combined red and purple lines would eventually reach 130,000 boardings before the COVID pandemic, but in the early 2000s, numbers were far lower. The subway ran from North Hollywood, through Koreatown, through downtown to Union Station. It provided valuable service to people who lived and worked along that corridor. It didn't transform regional transportation patterns. The tunnels themselves were engineering achievements. Boring through the Santa Monica Mountains required navigating through fractured rock, fault zones, and varying geology while maintaining precise alignment and grade. The stations featured public art commissioned specifically for each location, murals, mosaics, sculptures integrated into the architecture. The Westlake/MacArthur Park station included Francisco Letelier's ceramic tile mural El Sol depicting the cultural history of the neighborhood Every station was designed as a public space, not just a utilitarian transit node. But public art doesn't solve ridership problems. The Red Line served downtown, which was still recovering from decades of decline. It served Hollywood, which had tourists but limited residential density along the immediate corridor. It served North Hollywood, which was suburban in character. The heaviest ridership came from the Koreatown segment, dense, immigrant, transit-dependent. The neighborhoods that needed transit most used it. The ones that had alternatives largely didn't. The Hollywood sinkhole became shorthand for everything wrong with the project. It represented cost overruns, construction mismanagement, disruption to businesses, the gap between promises and delivery. When Yaroslavsky campaigned for Proposition A in 1998, he didn't need to make complex arguments about transit policy. He could point to Hollywood Boulevard and ask voters if they wanted more of that. They didn't. The ban passed. The subway stopped growing. What the ban couldn't stop was traffic. Wilshire Boulevard carried some of the heaviest bus ridership in the system. The 720 Rapid bus was standing room only during peak hours, packed beyond comfort. Transit-dependent riders, largely low-income immigrant communities, waited at bus stops while cars crawled past in congestion. The subway would have served them. The political coalition that stopped it included both wealthy West Side residents who didn't want construction near their property and populist skeptics who saw the project as wasteful spending on infrastructure that primarily served downtown interests. Both groups had legitimate concerns. Construction was expensive and disruptive. Cost overruns were real. Management problems were documented. The question was whether those were reasons to stop building or reasons to build better. Yaroslavsky believed the former. He championed the Orange Line busway in the San Fernando Valley, a dedicated right-of-way for buses that opened in 2005, cost $350 million, and achieved ridership numbers that exceeded predictions. He called it one of Metro's greatest success stories. He was right about the Orange Line. He may have been wrong about stopping the subway. Or both could be true simultaneously. The busway was cost-effective for its corridor, and the subway was necessary for Wilshire, and the political and financial system couldn't deliver both at the same time. Transit planning is always a negotiation between what's needed, what's affordable, and what's politically achievable. In 1998 Los Angeles, the achievable thing was stopping subway expansion. The tunnels that had been built remained. They operated. They carried passengers. They sat empty of trains between 2 in the morning and 5 in the morning, in the darkness 60 to 100 feet below the city, waiting for the next day's service to begin. The infrastructure was permanent. The political will was not. The Southern California Rapid Transit District and the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission hated each other with the kind of intensity that only competing bureaucracies can sustain. SCRTD operated buses and planned heavy rail subways. LACTC controlled county transportation funding and planned light rail. They had different boards, different staffs, different visions for what Los Angeles transit should become. Their rivalry was so dysfunctional that when LACTC built the Blue Line light rail from downtown to Long Beach, they terminated it at Pico Station, 6 blocks away from SCRTD's under-construction subway station at 7th Street/Metro Center. 6 blocks. The gap was intentional, a product of jurisdictional territorialism that meant passengers would have to walk between systems rather than transfer seamlessly. The Los Angeles Times reported the absurdity. The public was outraged. Politicians felt heat. The state legislature decided the only solution was forced marriage. Assembly Bill 152 created the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, effective February 1, 1993. SCRTD and LACTC officially went out of business on April 1 after a 60-day crossover period. The merger was supposed to end the feuding. Instead, it created a new agency carrying the institutional resentments of both parents. Metro initially retained both predecessor agencies' downtown offices, then moved to the new Metro headquarters building adjacent to Union Station in 1995. Former SCRTD operations staff occupied the lower half of the 25-story tower. Former LACTC planning and construction staff took the upper half. The physical separation symbolized the division. The building itself became controversial. Italian marble, granite, limestone in the lobby. Local media called it the Taj Mahal. Metro officials responded that capital construction funds couldn't be used for operations or buying buses or subsidizing fares, only for buildings. The explanation didn't stop the criticism. The new agency inherited projects in various stages of completion and dysfunction. The Red Line subway was under construction, behind schedule, over budget. The Blue Line light rail was operational, but poorly integrated with other transit. The Green Line in the median of the Century Freeway was being built. Multiple agencies had spent years planning routes that now had to be reconciled under a single organizational structure that didn't trust itself. Decision-making became labyrinthine. Metro's board consisted of representatives from the City of Los Angeles County Supervisors, and mayors from the 88 other incorporated cities in the county. The mayor of LA and 3 appointees, 5 county supervisors, representatives from 4 geographic sectors, a non-voting member from Caltrans. Everyone had constituencies, political ambitions, and the memory of battles their predecessor agencies had fought. The board managed a budget exceeding $9 billion annually across 170 bus routes covering 1,500 square miles. Formula allocation distributed funding to 16 municipal transit operators and 80 cities using performance data and population figures. The majority came from local sales taxes. Proposition A from 1980 generated approximately $400 million annually. Proposition C from 1990 added another $300 million. Federal and state grants supplemented local revenue but remained unpredictable year to year. Getting consensus among 14 voting members representing jurisdictions with a combined population exceeding 10 million people meant navigating not just technical questions but values in conflict. Kenneth Hahn had pushed for the Blue Line to serve South Los Angeles. Zev Yaroslavsky represented the West Side and opposed subway expansion. Henry Waxman held federal purse strings and the methane ban. Mayor Tom Bradley wanted the subway to showcase downtown's revival. Each had legitimate constituencies and incompatible visions. The 1998 Proposition A ban emerged from this context. Yaroslavsky wasn't simply anti-transit. He later championed Measure R in 2008, which restored funding for rail expansion including the Purple Line extension down Wilshire. His opposition in the 90s was specifically to subway tunneling, which he viewed as expensive and poorly managed. The Hollywood sinkhole and cost overruns validated his skepticism. The ban he sponsored didn't prohibit transit development, it prohibited using county sales tax money for the most expensive component of the most expensive transit mode. The effect was to shift Metro toward light rail and bus rapid transit. The Gold Line to Pasadena, built above ground and in former railroad rights-of-way, opened in 2003. The Expo Line to Culver City and eventually Santa Monica used the old Pacific Electric right-of-way. The Orange Line busway opened in 2005. These projects were cheaper per mile than subway. They also served different purposes and populations. Light rail and busways work well in corridors with available right-of-way and moderate density. They fail in the densest corridors where land is expensive, traffic is heavy, and grade separation is essential. Wilshire Boulevard needed a subway. It got packed buses instead. The 720 Rapid and 740 Rapid lines became the highest ridership bus routes in the system, carrying tens of thousands of daily passengers in vehicles designed for dozens. Metro's internal culture reflected its fractured origins. Planning staff from the old LACTC brought light rail expertise. Operations staff from SCRTD understood bus systems and heavy rail. Coordination was difficult. Major construction projects were sometimes handed to independent construction authorities, separate entities with their own boards and staff, partly to avoid Metro's internal bureaucracy. The Expo Line Construction Authority was created to build the Expo Line. Phase 1 encountered significant cost overruns and delays, adding $300 million and coming in $35 million per mile over budget. The authority had used negotiated design-build procurement, intending to establish fixed prices as design progressed, rather than bidding on incomplete designs. It didn't work. Costs outstripped estimates as engineering details emerged. Phase 2 switched to traditional design-build. and delivered on time and on budget. The lesson was that procurement method matters, but so does institutional capacity. Metro has since moved away from construction authorities and builds most projects in-house, having developed expertise through painful experience. The Regional Connector, completed in 2023, was delivered by Metro directly and successfully linked light rail lines through downtown, finally fixing the Blue Line gap from 30 years earlier. The political coalition that stopped subway expansion in 1998 shifted by 2008. Traffic worsened. Environmental concerns about air quality increased. Gas prices spiked. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa championed the Subway to the Sea as a signature initiative. Congressman Waxman, convinced by a panel of experts that modern tunneling methods could safely navigate the methane zone, authored legislation to lift the federal ban. The lift became law in December 2007 as part of the Omnibus Spending Bill. Measure R passed in November 2008 with 67% support, well over the two-thirds threshold required for tax increases. It included funding for the Purple Line extension down Wilshire Boulevard. Yaroslavsky, who'd banned subway funding a decade earlier, supported Measure R. His position had evolved, or circumstances had, or both. The Orange Line's success demonstrated he wasn't anti-rail. The continued crowding on Wilshire buses demonstrated that alternatives weren't sufficient. Measure M followed in 2016, adding another $120 billion over 40 years for transit expansion. The money was there. The bans were lifted. Construction could resume. But 20 years had been lost. A generation of Angelenos had grown up in a city where the subway was a downtown curiosity, not a regional network. The political fights had left institutional scars. Trust had to be rebuilt with communities that had watched agencies fight while their buses remained overcrowded. The irony was that the forced merger of SCRTD and LACTC, meant to end dysfunction, had instead baked it into the structure of the new agency. Metro eventually learned to function, but it took decades. The price was measured in projects delayed, routes not built, riders not served. The subway sat incomplete while political actors negotiated over power, money, and whose vision of the city would prevail. Infrastructure is supposed to last a century. Politics changes every election cycle. The gap between those timescales is where projects die. The D-Line extension, formerly called the Purple Line extension, formerly called the West Side Subway extension, formerly called the Subway to the Sea, has been under construction since 2014. Section 1 will open in fall 2025, taking passengers from Wilshire-Western and Koreatown to 3 new stations, Wilshire-La Brea, Wilshire-Fairfax, and Wilshire-La Cienega in Beverly Hills. 4 miles. $3.35 billion. That figure includes $575 million in cost overruns approved in 3 separate increments between 2020 and 2024. The original budget was $2.8 billion. Section 2, extending to Century City, is already tracking toward $125 million over budget. Section 3 to Westwood and the VA hospital will add more. When complete, tentatively 2028 for full operation, the 9-mile extension will have cost approximately $10 billion, though final numbers won't be known until the last contractor is paid and the last change order processed. The route tunnels directly through the methane zone that was declared off-limits after the Ross explosion in 1985. Modern tunnel boring machines include methane detection and ventilation systems. The tunnels are lined with reinforced concrete segments designed to contain any gas that seeps through. Monitoring equipment checks continuously. The technology works mostly. In 2015, a small methane explosion occurred near Wilshire and Curson, across from the La Brea tar pits, proving the hazard remains active. No one was injured. The incident received minimal media coverage. Construction continued. Beverly Hills fought the subway for years. The city filed a lawsuit claiming that tunneling beneath Beverly Hills High School posed unacceptable risks to students, potential ground settlement, noise, vibration, disruption. The school sits on land that was once part of the Rodeo de las Aguas land grant, valuable real estate that the school district wanted protected. Beverly Hills United School District spent over $16 million in school bond money on litigation against Metro. They lost. The courts ruled that Metro had followed proper environmental review procedures and that the risks were manageable. The tunnel passes 105 feet below the high school's athletic fields. Monitors track any ground movement. The boring machines operate slowly through that section, advancing with caution. The school remains open. The football team still practices. The tunnel advances beneath them, invisible except for the equipment yards where segments are lowered into the shaft. The lawsuit delayed construction but couldn't stop it. What it revealed was the political equation. Wealthy communities have resources to fight infrastructure they don't want. They can hire lawyers, file injunctions, tie up projects in courts and environmental review processes. Poorer neighborhoods have buses that arrive late and overcrowded. The Wilshire Corridor needed the subway decades ago. It's getting it now, slowly, expensively, against resistance. Century City was built on what used to be the 20th Century Fox backlot. Office towers rose in the 1960s and 70s. It's now one of the densest employment centers in Los Angeles County. High-rise buildings full of lawyers, entertainment executives, talent agencies, investment firms. Workers commute from across the region. Parking is expensive. Traffic is brutal. The Purple Line will drop passengers directly into the district at Constellation Boulevard. The station construction requires excavating caverns 70 feet underground in an active business district. Street access must be maintained. Utilities must be relocated. Water, sewer, gas, electric, telecommunications, fiber optics. Each has an owner. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Southern California Gas, various telecommunications companies. Coordinating with them adds time and cost. On Expo Line Phase 1, delays from DWP relocating power lines added 6 months and $29 million. Metro learned to dedicate more staff to third-party coordination. The lesson was expensive. Tunnel boring machines are not fast. They advance 50 to 200 feet per day under good conditions. When encountering fault zones, fractured rock, or higher than expected groundwater, progress slows. The machines cost tens of millions to manufacture. They're custom designed for specific soil conditions. Once assembled, they can't be easily modified. If conditions differ from what core samples predicted, the machine pushes through anyway slowly. 2 machines bored the Section 1 tunnels, working simultaneously from different shafts to accelerate the schedule. They operated around the clock, 6 days a week. Crews rotated in shifts. The excavated material, millions of cubic yards of soil and rock, was removed from the shafts, loaded onto trucks, and hauled to disposal sites. The environmental review process specified where spoils could go. Neighbors near the disposal sites complained about truck traffic. Metro rerouted trucks, adding distance and fuel costs. Every station is excavated as a cavern, then lined with concrete. The deepest stations go down 100 feet. Support systems include ground freezing to stabilize soil, dewatering to lower the water table, soil grouting to fill voids and strengthen material. These techniques are proven but expensive. Unforeseen conditions require adaptive responses. If groundwater is higher than anticipated, more dewatering. If soil is weaker, more grouting. Each adjustment adds cost and time. The stations will include elevators, escalators, ventilation systems, public art, wayfinding signage, ticket vending machines, turnstiles, security cameras, communication systems, lighting, platform edge doors on some stations, and seismic design that allows the structures to move during earthquakes without catastrophic failure. Every system must meet accessibility standards, fire codes, seismic codes, and Metro design criteria that evolved from decades of hard lessons. Wilshire/La Brea Station will feature a large-scale artwork integrated into the architecture. Artists are commissioned through Metro's Percent for Art program, which allocates a percentage of capital costs to public art. The artwork isn't decorative. It's meant to give each station identity, to make transit infrastructure feel like civic space. Whether passengers waiting for trains notice or care is a separate question. The art exists regardless. The workforce building the extension includes union labor tunnel, miners, concrete workers, electricians, plumbers, heavy equipment operators. Prevailing wage requirements mean labor costs are higher than private sector rates. This is intentional policy. Public projects should provide family-supporting jobs, not race to the bottom on wages. The trade-off is that projects cost more. Measure R and Measure M, the sales tax measures funding the work, passed with voter support. The public agreed to tax themselves. What they expected in return was a subway that works. Section 2 extends from Beverly Hills through Century City to Westwood. Section 3 reaches the VA hospital. The full extension stops there, with tail tracks that could allow future continuation to Santa Monica. But Santa Monica is 7 miles farther west. No funding exists for that segment. No timeline has been proposed. The subway to the sea remains a slogan, not a plan. When Section 1 opens in fall 2025, riders will board at Wilshire Southwestern and travel 4 miles west to Wilshire Southwestern La Cienega. 25-minute rides from Westwood to downtown will still require waiting for Section 3 to open, tentatively 2028. Until then, the Purple Line extends partway, serving some but not all of the corridor that needed it 40 years ago. The buses still run, still overcrowded, still stuck in traffic. Infrastructure built in segments over decades creates winners and losers based on construction sequence. Neighborhoods along Section 1 benefit first. Westwood waits. Santa Monica has no date. The logic of phased construction is financial. Build what you can afford now. Extend later when more funding arrives. The human logic is different. Need doesn't follow construction timelines. Metro operates 107 stations across 6 rail lines. The system runs approximately 19 hours per day, from 5 in the morning until nearly midnight. Trains arrive every 4 to 12 minutes depending on line and time. Service stops entirely between 2 and 3:30 in the morning for maintenance and track inspection. On New Year's Eve, service runs later. Otherwise, the city sleeps while workers inspect rails, test signals, clean stations, and prepare for the next day. The Purple Line tunnels sit in darkness during those hours, silent except for the hum of ventilation fans maintaining air circulation. The concrete lining bears no graffiti. No one accesses the tunnels except authorized personnel. The walls are smooth, curved, reinforced with rebar. They're designed to last a century. Whether the city using them will look anything like the one that built them is unknowable. In 2019, the combined B&D lines, the red and purple lines before Metro renamed everything with letters, carried approximately 133,000 weekday boardings. The tunnels built at such expense were finally carrying meaningful passenger loads. Then March 2020 arrived. The pandemic emptied the trains. Ridership on the subway dropped 70% within weeks. Downtown office workers stayed home. Hollywood tourists stopped coming. The train still ran. Metro maintained service for essential workers, medical personnel, grocery store employees. But the cars that had been standing room only during rush hour now carried scattered passengers in masks, sitting as far apart as the seats allowed. By September 2024, combined B&D line weekday ridership had recovered to approximately 60,800 boardings. That's 54% of 2019 levels. The system hovers around 50 to 60% recovery and has for nearly 3 years. Other Metro rail lines recovered faster. The A and E lines are above 80%. Light rail serving working-class immigrant communities bounced back. The subway serving downtown and Hollywood did not. The explanations multiply. Increased remote work means fewer downtown commuters. The regional connector, which opened in 2023, redirected some former subway trips to the reconfigured A and E lines, eliminating transfers that used to require using the subway trunk downtown. Crime, homelessness, and perceived safety issues drive away choice riders who have alternatives. Actual crime statistics are complex, but perception matters more than data when people decide whether to take transit. Metro responded with increased law enforcement, homeless outreach services, ambassadors to assist passengers, and cleaning protocols. The agency hired more security, deployed sheriff's deputies to patrol stations and trains, and implemented the tap-to-exit program at selected stations, locking fare gates at both ends so passengers must pay when entering and again when exiting. At North Hollywood Station, the program captured nearly 120,000 unpaid exits in less than a year, recovering over $130,000 in fares. But enforcement doesn't solve the underlying issue. The subway ridership was always fragile. Even at peak, 130,000 daily boardings on a system that cost $4.5 billion to build represents expensive service. The light rail A line, built largely at grade for $877 million in 1990, carried similar numbers pre-pandemic. Cost per rider matters. Return on investment matters. These aren't just accounting questions. They determine whether future transit projects get funded or whether voters decide they've seen enough expensive infrastructure with disappointing results. Metro's total system ridership in 2024 reached 321 million boardings, an 8% increase over 2023, marking the first time since the pandemic that the agency hit pre-COVID levels. But that's system-wide. Bus ridership recovered faster and more fully. Weekend rail ridership actually exceeds pre-pandemic levels. Weekday ridership lags because commute patterns changed. People who can work from home do. People who can't, service workers, healthcare workers, retail employees, still need transit. They're riding buses and light rail more than subway. The geographic pattern is clear. Transit-dependent communities use transit. Everyone else uses it when convenient or necessary, but defaults to cars when they have the option. Los Angeles built a subway, hoping it would attract choice riders, reducing traffic and air pollution. It works best serving people who don't have choices. That's not a failure. Providing mobility to transit-dependent populations is valuable. But it's not the transformative regional impact that justified spending billions. The downtown Los Angeles that the subway was meant to serve has changed radically since the 1980s. The Staples Center, now Crypto.com Arena, opened in 1999. The Walt Disney Concert Hall opened in 2003. New residential towers converted former office buildings. The downtown population grew from under 30,000 in 1990 to over 60,000 by 2020. Arts District warehouses became lofts, restaurants opened, the neighborhood gentrified. But office occupancy dropped after the pandemic. Major employers allowed permanent remote work. The towers still stand but run half-empty on weekdays. The workers who used to commute on the subway now work from kitchen tables in Glendale, Pasadena, Culver City, wherever they can afford housing. The subway serves a downtown that needed it in 2019 and needs it less now. Hollywood never fully matched its ridership potential. Tourists use the subway to reach the Walk of Fame, but tourist ridership is sporadic, seasonal, unpredictable. Residents use it if they live near stations and work somewhere the train reaches. Everyone else drives. Hollywood Boulevard remains congested. The subway runs beneath it, nearly empty off-peak hours, crowded only during narrow windows when enough people want to go the same direction at the same time. North Hollywood became a terminus, not a through station. Riders heading to the valley take the subway to North Hollywood, then transfer to buses or the Orange Line busway. The transfer adds time. The busway is excellent. Dedicated lanes, high frequency, signal priority at intersections, but it's not seamless. Every transfer point is friction. Passengers who can drive usually do. The subway was designed for a future Los Angeles that never quite arrived. It anticipated denser development along corridors, more downtown employment, continued car ownership costs that would make transit competitive. Some of that happened. Enough didn't. And the pandemic reset assumptions about commuting entirely. In October 2024, Metro surpassed 1 million average weekday boardings system-wide for the second consecutive month. The press releases celebrated recovery. CEO Stephanie Wiggins called it a testament to the enormous effort we've undertaken to make our system cleaner, safer, easier, more comfortable and reliable. The agency tracks metrics, on-time performance, service cancellations, customer complaints, crime reports. The numbers mostly trend positive. Ridership grows, the system works. But the subway specifically, the most expensive infrastructure, the deepest tunnels, the longest construction timelines, carries fewer riders per dollar invested than almost any other component of the metro system. That's not an argument against subways. It's an observation about what Los Angeles turned out to need versus what it built. The city needed comprehensive regional transit 30 years ago. It got political battles, delayed construction, incomplete networks, and a subway that serves part of the region well while leaving most areas dependent on cars and buses. The tunnels will outlast everyone involved in building them. The concrete is rated for a century, The stations can be renovated, upgraded, modified. The infrastructure is permanent in ways political coalitions and ridership patterns are not. What matters is whether future generations will find the subway useful, whether the city will grow denser along its corridors, whether changes in housing, employment, and transportation technology make fixed rail infrastructure more or less relevant. Those answers aren't available yet. The subway operates every day. 60,000 people use it. That's 60,000 trips that don't require cars, parking, freeway space. It's also half what the system carried 5 years ago, and a fraction of what planners predicted when they broke ground in 1986. The question isn't whether the subway was worth building, it's already built. The question is whether the next extensions, Section 2 to Century City, Section 3 to Westwood, will attract the ridership that justifies their $10 billion cost, or whether there'll be more expensive infrastructure running half-empty off-peak hours, valuable to those who use it, irrelevant to everyone else. Metro is building them anyway. The money is allocated, the contracts are signed, the decision has been made. The city is committed. What remains is to see if the future vindicates the investment or proves that infrastructure built for one vision of Los Angeles doesn't serve the city that actually exists. Tunnel boring machine operators work 12-hour shifts in spaces where the temperature never changes and daylight doesn't exist. The machines advance at rates measured in feet per day, which sounds slow until you calculate that thousands of tons of rock and soil must be excavated, removed, hauled to the surface, and replaced with precast concrete segments that form the tunnel lining. This happens continuously, around the clock, 6 days a week, for years. The crew inside the tunnel during operation includes the TBM operator, who controls the machine's advance and monitors systems, miners who remove excavated material and load it onto conveyors, concrete segment installers who position the lining pieces and bolt them together, mechanics who maintain hydraulics, electrical systems, and cutting tools, surveyors who ensure alignment stays within millimeter tolerances, and safety officers who monitor air quality, structural stability, and hazard conditions. Outside, support crews manage logistics, bringing materials down, removing spoils, coordinating with surface operations. Pay varies by role and union agreement. Tunnel miners in Los Angeles typically earn between $35 and $70 per hour, depending on experience and specialty. Prevailing wage requirements on public projects set minimum rates above private sector levels. The total payroll for a tunnel project runs into hundreds of millions over the construction period. These are union jobs with benefits, pensions, and safety standards enforced by OSHA, Cal/OSHA, and union representatives. Deaths are rare on modern tunnel projects, but not impossible. The safety improvements since early subway construction, better ventilation, gas detection, ground support systems, emergency procedures, have reduced fatalities significantly. Injuries still occur. Cave-ins at tunnel faces, equipment failures, exposure to hazardous materials, repetitive strain from physical labor, and the psychological strain of working underground for extended periods all take their toll. The workers don't appear in press releases unless something goes wrong. They don't testify at Metro board meetings. Their names aren't on plaques. The public sees the finished stations with their art installations and architectural details. The labor that created the space remains invisible, which is how infrastructure typically works. The product is visible, the production process is not. Tunnel construction requires specialized skills that aren't easily transferable. A miner who spends 5 years on the Purple Line extension might move to another tunnel project, a water conveyance system, a highway tunnel, another transit project in another city. The work is transient by nature. When a project finishes, the crew disperses. Some find work immediately on the next project. Others wait. The boom and bust cycle of infrastructure spending creates employment instability even for highly skilled workers. Metro's contractor on Section 1 of the Purple Line extension was a joint venture of Skanska, Trailer, and J.F. Shea. They bid $1.6 billion for the work, $192 million more than the competing bid from Dragados. Metro selected Skanska's team based on experience with other Los Angeles projects including the E-Line and Regional Connector. The decision was controversial. The losing bidder was substantially cheaper. Metro justified the premium by pointing to Skanska's track record. The $1.6 billion contract covered tunneling, station, excavation, and structural work. It didn't include systems, electrical, communications, fire suppression, or rolling stock or final finishes. Those are separate contracts. The division allows specialization but creates coordination challenges. The structural contractor hands off to the systems contractor at defined milestones. If the structure isn't ready on schedule, the systems work delays. If systems installation reveals structural deficiencies, rework is necessary. Change orders accumulate. The $575 million in Section 1 cost overruns came from multiple sources: additional construction work for tunnels, stations, track work, systems, and testing; extended construction easements requiring ongoing payments to property owners; delays from earlier tunneling problems that rippled forward affecting downstream work; and unforeseen conditions that required adaptive responses. No single catastrophic failure explains the overruns. They accumulated incrementally across hundreds of decisions and conditions. This is typical for large tunnel projects. A comprehensive study of transit megaprojects found that 90% exceed their budgets and 70% miss their schedules. The reasons are structural. Optimism bias in planning leads to underestimated costs and timelines. Political pressure to get projects approved encourages lowball estimates. Genuine uncertainty about subsurface conditions means surprises are inevitable, and the complexity of coordinating multiple contractors, jurisdictions, and utilities creates friction that manifests as delays and costs. Metro learned this the hard way through the red line construction in the 90s. The Hollywood sinkhole, contractor disputes, thin tunnel walls, cost overruns, all were symptoms of inadequate project management, insufficient oversight, and unrealistic baseline assumptions. The agency reformed procurement practices, increased in-house technical capacity, and developed more conservative planning assumptions. The Section 1 overruns are lower as a percentage of total cost than comparable segments of the original red line. Progress, but not perfection. Workers interviewed for projects like this, when they agree to speak, which isn't always, more describe the job in practical terms. It's physically demanding. It pays well. It's dangerous but manageable if protocols are followed. The underground environment is disorienting at first, then becomes routine. Some workers prefer it to surface construction. No weather, no traffic, no public watching. Others find it claustrophobic and quit after months. Turnover rates are higher than on surface projects. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, responsible for relocating utilities, employs its own crews and contractors. When subway construction requires moving water mains, sewer lines, or electrical conduits, DWP schedules the work based on its own priorities and capacity. Metro can request expedited timelines but can't compel compliance. On Expo Line Phase 1, DWP delays relocating overhead power lines underground, added 6 months and $29 million to the project. Metro responded by dedicating more staff to third-party coordination on subsequent projects, essentially babysitting utility owners to prevent repeat delays. This isn't corruption or incompetence, it's institutional friction. DOBP has its own capital program, maintenance obligations, union agreements, and political pressures. Subway construction ranks on their priority list somewhere below keeping water flowing to ratepayers and electricity running to hospitals. They'll relocate utilities when they can, but when they can, doesn't always align with Metro's construction schedule. The workers relocating utilities are also union labor. IBEW electricians, pipe fitters, heavy equipment operators. They're paid prevailing wages. Their work is essential, but not glamorous. If they do it well, no one notices. If something goes wrong, a water main breaks, power goes out, they work overnight to fix it. The relationship between infrastructure, maintenance, and infrastructure construction is that the former enables the latter, but they're managed by different agencies with different funding streams and priorities. Between 2 and 3:30 every morning, Metro conducts track inspection and maintenance on all rail lines. Crews walk the tunnels checking for rail wear, signal malfunctions, structural issues, water infiltration, and any anomalies that could affect safe operation. This work is invisible to passengers. It happens in darkness when the system is shut down. The workers who perform it, track maintainers, signal technicians, electricians, are essential to keeping trains running but rarely acknowledged. The Division 20 yard on Santa Fe Avenue in downtown stores the heavy rail fleet and performs maintenance. Workers there repair broken components, conduct scheduled overhauls, troubleshoot problems reported by train operators, and prepare vehicles for the next day's service. The facility operates around the clock. Cars that finish their last run late at night are cleaned, inspected, and serviced before returning to operation the next morning. This labor is operational rather than capital, funded from Metro's operating budget rather than construction budgets. Operating costs come from fares, sales tax revenue, and subsidies. Capital construction can be financed with bonds paid over decades. Operations must be paid year by year. When budget pressures emerge, service cuts are easier politically than halting construction projects, where contracts are already signed and penalties for cancellation are severe. The workers who built the tunnels and the workers who maintain them occupy different categories in Metro's accounting. One is a capital expense amortized over the life of the asset. The other is an operating expense that recurs perpetually. Both are necessary. Only one shows up in infrastructure announcements and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. No one has proposed a memorial to tunnel workers in Los Angeles. No plaques list their names. The closest acknowledgement is the requirement that contractors maintain safety records and report injuries and fatalities. When projects finish on time and under budget, rare, contractors receive performance bonuses. When they don't, penalties may apply. Workers themselves receive their hourly wages and move on to the next job. The tunnels remain. The labor that created them is consumed in the creation. That's the nature of construction work. The product endures, the process is forgotten. The subway carries passengers who never think about who dug the hole, or how many shifts it took, or whether anyone was injured in the excavation. This isn't a moral failing. It's how infrastructure functions. The visible result obscures the invisible effort. When Section 3 completes in 2028, thousands of workers will have spent years of their lives underground creating tunnels that will serve passengers for a century. Their contribution will be measured in cubic yards excavated, concrete segments installed, systems tested, and commissioned. They won't be remembered individually. The subway will be. The tunnel boring machines that excavated the Purple Line extension are gone now. After breaking through at their final destinations, they were either disassembled and shipped to the next project or buried in place, entombed in concrete because removing them costs more than leaving them. This is standard practice. Somewhere beneath Los Angeles, multiple tunnel boring machines from various projects sit in concrete vaults, monuments to infrastructure that no one will ever see. The tunnels themselves will outlast the city that built them in any recognizable form. Concrete structures designed for seismic zones with reinforcement and flexible joints can survive for centuries. The London Underground operates tunnels from the 1860s. The Paris Metro runs trains through tunnels from 1900. Los Angeles subway tunnels from 1993 show minimal deterioration. The ones being completed in 2025 will still be structurally sound in 2025, assuming maintenance continues and no catastrophic event destroys them. What changes is everything around them. The neighborhoods at the surface, the demographics, the economy, the reasons people travel. The land uses above Wilshire Boulevard will transform multiple times over the tunnel's lifespan. Buildings will be demolished and replaced. Businesses will open and close. The oil field that caused the methane explosion will eventually be exhausted. It's already been producing for over a century. The faults will continue moving, millimeters per year, accumulating stress until the next earthquake releases it. The subway doesn't stop earthquakes. It survives them. That's what the engineering achieves, not prevention of geologic processes, but resilience to their consequences. The tunnels will shake. The segments will flex. The structure will absorb the motion and remain functional, or it will sustain damage that can be repaired. Either way, it's designed to not collapse catastrophically. That's the bar for success. Current ridership at 54% of pre-pandemic levels creates financial pressure. Fare box recovery, the percentage of operating costs covered by fares, was never high on the subway. The Red Line historically recovered less than 20% of costs from fares. Sales tax revenues subsidizes the difference. This is normal for transit systems worldwide. But when ridership drops, the subsidy per rider increases, making the system more expensive to operate relative to the service it provides. Metro's total system ridership recovery has been stronger, reaching 86% of pre-pandemic levels by late 2024, but averages mask disparities. Light rail and buses serving working-class communities recovered faster. The subway, serving downtown and Hollywood, has not. The question for Metro's board is whether to maintain full subway service at current low utilization or reduce frequency to match demand. Reducing service saves money but makes the system less useful, potentially driving away remaining riders. It's a spiral that transit agencies struggle to avoid. The D-line extension will add capacity and destinations. Whether it will add ridership proportional to its cost remains to be seen. Westwood is a significant destination. UCLA, the VA hospital, office buildings, medical centers. But most UCLA students live near campus and walk. Hospital workers often work irregular shifts that don't align with transit schedules. Office workers increasingly work from home. The ridership projections were made before the pandemic restructured commuting patterns. They may prove optimistic. Santa Monica, the C in Subway to the Sea, has no funded extension. The Expo Line light rail reaches Santa Monica, terminating near the beach. It runs at grade and in street-running sections, slower than a subway but functional. Whether a subway extension from Westwood to Santa Monica would justify its cost is debatable. The corridor isn't particularly dense. Land use is mostly low-rise. The political will that pushed the Wilshire extension doesn't extend farther west. The slogan remains aspirational. What LA built is a partial subway network serving part of the region. It connects downtown to North Hollywood through Hollywood and Koreatown. It will soon connect downtown to Westwood through Miracle Mile and Beverly Hills. These are valuable corridors. The subway provides mobility that buses can't match, but it's not comprehensive. Most of Los Angeles County remains unserved by rail. The bus system carries 80% of metro ridership because buses can go anywhere streets exist. Rail can only go where tracks are laid. The financial model depends on sustained sales tax revenue. Measure R and Measure M passed with voter support, but they're not permanent. They can be repealed or not renewed. If economic conditions deteriorate, if voters lose confidence in Metro's ability to deliver, if competing priorities emerge, the funding stream could dry up. This hasn't happened yet. It could. The subway operates regardless. Trains run every 4 to 12 minutes, depending on time of day and line. 60,000 people board daily. That's 60,000 trips that occur because the infrastructure exists. The passengers don't care about cost overruns or political history or ridership projections. They care whether the train arrives on time and reaches their destination. For them, the subway works. For Metro as an institution, the subway represents both achievement and burden. Achievement because they completed a technically challenging project that survived earthquakes, methane, political opposition, and agency dysfunction. Burden because it's expensive to operate, requires constant maintenance, and hasn't delivered the transformational ridership impact that justified its cost. The tunnels don't care about any of this. They exist. They're lined with concrete. They're illuminated when trains pass and dark otherwise. Ventilation fans maintain air circulation. Pumps remove groundwater that seeps through. Sensors monitor structural integrity. The system is designed to function with minimal human intervention most of the time. When problems arise, a signal malfunction, a door stuck open, a passenger medical emergency, protocols exist for response. Between 2 and 3:30 every morning, the system shuts down. Workers walk the tracks checking for issues. The tunnels sit silent except for mechanical hum and the occasional drip of water. This is when maintenance happens: rail grinding, signal testing, structural inspection. The work is unglamorous and essential. Without it, the system would gradually degrade until failure occurred. Infrastructure requires perpetual care. The initial construction is dramatic. Tunneling machines, explosions, excavation, concrete pours. Maintenance is repetitive. Inspections, repairs, replacements, incremental improvements. The former gets publicity. The latter gets budget lines. Both are necessary. Only one is interesting to anyone outside the agency. Los Angeles committed to building a subway in earthquake country through abandoned oil fields under one of the busiest boulevards in the nation, despite methane, faults, sinkholes, political opposition, cost overruns, and agency dysfunction. The commitment was sustained across decades, multiple mayors, changing demographics, economic cycles, and a pandemic. The subway exists because the city kept building, even when circumstances suggested stopping might be easier. Whether that commitment was wise depends on the time frame of evaluation. Over 5 years, the subway looks expensive and underutilized. Over 50 years, it might prove essential as the region grows denser and car ownership becomes less universal. Over a century, it will be infrastructure that exists, serving whoever needs it, regardless of whether the original justifications remain valid. The boring machines are gone. The workers have moved on. The politicians who championed or opposed the project are retired or dead. The agencies that fought over control have merged and reformed. The neighborhoods have changed, the ridership patterns shifted, the pandemic reset assumptions, the climate crisis looms. The next earthquake approaches, not today, not tomorrow, but inevitably. The tunnels remain. They sit 60 to 100 feet below Wilshire Boulevard, reinforced concrete lined with tile and steel, carrying trains through darkness from station to station. They were built to last a century. They'll be here when everyone reading this is gone. What they'll serve, who they'll carry, whether they'll be remembered as infrastructure visionary or infrastructure wasteful depends on a future that hasn't been written. The ground still moves. The faults still accumulate stress. The methane still seeps. Los Angeles still sprawls across a basin ringed by mountains, built on sediment and ambition in a place where the earth itself refuses permanence. The subway is the city's bet that human engineering can create stability in an inherently unstable landscape. So far, the tunnels have held. That's not nothing. But it's not everything either. The question was never whether LA could build a subway in earthquake country. The answer is yes, obviously, measurably yes. The question was whether the city that built it would be the city that needed it. The answer is still being determined. Underground, in darkness, one train at a time.